If you're a finance leader working in a startup, then you probably know that startup forecasts are usually wrong. And the question is, are they still useful to help the business make better decisions? This video is part of my Startup Finance Mistakes series, and in this video, I'm going to talk through the real reasons why startup forecasts often fail, even when the finance model itself looks pretty good. And if you stay to the end, you'll understand the forecasting mistakes that can really destroy Runway and what strong CFOs do differently. My name's Alysha Randall. I'm a CFO and I've been working in startups and scale-ups for the last 20 years, and I wrote about it as well in my book, Financial Leadership Fundamentals. So startup forecasts are usually wrong. This isn't a groundbreaking idea. I think as soon as you put a budget together, you know that it's wrong. It's just a bit more nuanced in startups, largely because they're changing so fast and there's a lot going on, which I'll go through shortly. So this is not because finance teams are bad at forecasting. And it's not because the model itself is broken. Particularly, most people are using AI such as Claude to help build their models, but they're usually wrong because startups change too quickly. Assumptions can be quite optimistic, and most businesses don't revisit the forecast often enough once it really kicks in. So this is a startup mistake that I have seen in the past. And this issue is not that forecasts are wrong. The issues are whether businesses treat them like certainty instead of a planning tool. So a few things I wanted to go through. The first one is that forecasts are built on assumptions. Now, of course, at a startup stage, a lot of forecasts are really based on assumptions rather than historical data. So I've certainly made plenty of assumptions, whether that's a new region, a new product, a new SKU, hiring timelines, customer growth, particularly at early stage, pricing changes, churn, especially once you get into that scale up, and how efficient marketing is. Now, corporations are similar, but because they're a bit more slow moving and they do have seasonality, they have been around for a long time, the growth might be quite minimal. They may introduce maybe one new product a year, for example, then they don't have the same complexity from that perspective as a startup. So the earlier the business, the less reliable those assumptions are, and that's normal. And the mistake is pretending that these assumptions or inputs that you're putting in are facts. Number two, founders are naturally optimistic. They're very much glass half full type of people. That's what you want in a founder, but sometimes that can hinder. So most startups do exist because founders believe that something can grow faster or be done differently, or they can innovate. And optimism really is part of their job, but it just doesn't help sometimes when you're trying to create forecasts, because forecasts sometimes might assume that every single deal you're going into closes, every single hire works out. You don't have to fire people and replace them. Product launches happen on time or even earlier than, say, what the roadmap has, and fundraising lands exactly when planned. But as we have all experienced, reality is usually slower. So if you're dealing with enterprise customers, they always delay decisions. Hiring always takes longer than budget. Always, always. Sales cycles definitely expand. Marketing channels may stop performing. So what you may have worked in once, it doesn't work anymore. PPC comes to mind. Social media advertising as well comes to mind. And this doesn't mean that founders are wrong to be ambitious. It just means that forecasts need some proper pressure testing, and you need to allow for these things to happen. Number three is startups forecast in straight lines. This happens all the time. I've definitely done this and sometimes still do when there's nothing else that we can think about, but nothing else to rely on. But revenue grows for 2 months, and then the forecast might assume it grows another 10% next month, and then another 10%, another 10%. But as you can well appreciate, startup growth is rarely linear. So one large customer may distort an entire quarter, one partnership can temporarily inflate growth, one failed launch can completely change momentum. And also you might see a bit of this. as you're growing. It's not going to be linear. So strong CFOs really understand that startup forecasting is much more uneven and volatile. And even things just like seasonality also need to sometimes be built in. Number 4 is a business changes constantly, and this is absolutely the biggest difference between startups and larger businesses. In startups, pricings change, strategy changes, team change, products evolve, founders pivot. The forecast created 3 months ago will definitely be outdated in a startup. And that's why startup forecasting cannot be treated as a once a year budgeting exercise. It absolutely needs to be ongoing. So I have talked about rolling forecasts in detail before. I'll link to that video, but I will be touching on this topic later on in this particular video as well. Number 5, talking about rolling forecasts, is sometimes businesses confuse budgets with forecasts, and this can be a huge challenge. So a budget is what you hoped would happen, say at the beginning of the year, and a forecast is now what looks likely to happen, and the two are not the same thing. So sometimes a startup will build an annual budget and then spend the rest of the year comparing actuals to a plan that stopped being realistic at the end of Q1. But strong finance teams reforecast constantly, especially around cash runway, hiring, revenue timing, and fundraising plans. So personally, I have a rolling forecast that I look at regularly. This is not what I measure my month-end financials against. I have a budget at the beginning of the year, and if there's been anything material, I may update that quarterly. Otherwise, I update it mid-year. But I do have a rolling forecast that I probably look at on a weekly basis. And that is what I do to help me manage cash runway, help me, if something is taking more resources than we thought it would, what can I do to offset that? And it helps make strategic decisions throughout the business. So I use it as a tool for me. It's not necessarily for somebody to play around with. It's something that I play around with as a CFO and something that my head of finance actualizes every single month so that I can see how we're tracking towards our strategic goals. Number 6 is most startups don't do enough scenario planning, and this matters more in 2026 than ever before. Costs are really moving quickly. Fundraising is taking longer. Markets are changing faster. Tariff and international trading impacts are still evolving, and building one forecast is not. So you should have a base case, a worst case, and a stretch, particularly around, again, cash runway, revenue, hiring, and fundraising. And we often do much more scenarios than that. So having a best case and stretch case and a base case, that would be the 3 that I'd start with at the beginning of the year. I then have the rolling ones, and then usually that scenario element we would do for specific scenarios. So say, for example, we want to have a new partnership commercial agreement, and it's quite different to what we originally thought we were going to do, then I'll put that in the rolling forecast. I'll take a copy of the rolling forecast, do a scenario, and have a look at what that looks like. Number 7 is poor data creates poor forecasts. So forecasts really are only as good as the data behind them. So whether that's sales pipeline data, customer metrics, revenue definitions, all of those things should really form the baseline of what you're building your forecast on top of it. And that's why good data quality really matters so much. So I have been in a new CFO role for a few months. The Hoff and I have spent a lot of time making sure that the balance sheet's super clean, the revenue recognition is where it should be, and all of the controls and policies around that are in a good place. I also spend time with the sales team understanding the sales funnel and understanding what is classified as nearly closing, what isn't, all of those different things. And I've also spent time with the data team, making sure that we have a proper reconciliation of the data. We have one version of the truth and KPI definitions. A lot of these things were already in place, but it's just that is an area that I need to make sure is gold class, quality rise, so that as we scale, I can rely on my baseline. So the baseline isn't just your general ledger, it's around the whole business. Number 8 is forecasts are often updated too slowly. So annual budgets become outdated within the first quarter. Sometimes teams only review these quarterly or rebuild models too slowly, delay updating assumptions, and this is when managing cash particularly can be really challenging. So rolling forecasts, as I mentioned, monthly reforecasting and dynamic scenario planning is really, really key because startups just change so fast. So don't use this tool. It's the one thing that is always open on my laptop when I'm in the office or working from home. Number 9 is the goal of forecasting is not accuracy. This is a quite important point. The goal is not to predict the future perfectly. That's absolutely impossible in startups. Instead, the goal is really understanding your risks earlier, any red flags, making better decisions, spotting cash issues much sooner so that you can make decisions quickly so that you don't fall in a hole from a cash perspective. And as I mentioned, testing different scenarios. So a useful forecast is much more important than a perfect forecast. You want to be using this as a tool regularly rather than saying, oh, look how good we are at forecasting. Aren't I amazing? The variance is minimal. That's not what you're looking for. So as I said, startup forecasts are usually wrong because assumptions are optimistic, businesses change quickly, the data could be imperfect, or teams don't update their forecasts often enough. This is quite normal, but the real value of forecasting is not precision. It's helping business makes better decisions before the problems become serious. And this is where a strong CFO really adds value. You get a seat at the decision-making table and you're demonstrating your strategic value. So this is part of my Startup Finance Mistakes series. So you'll find useful other videos in this series of why startups run out of cash, KPI mistakes many startups make, and the 5 skills every future CFO must learn. So if any of those videos sound interesting to you, then take a look at my channel and then subscribe also so you get notified when those come in. If you want to be a skilled finance leader in the next 12 months, then I've got a 3-step plan for you. The first one is to subscribe to this channel, as I mentioned. The second one is to take a look at financial leadership fundamentals, how to become a CFO in a startup or scale up, where I talk about real world case studies and things that you can implement quickly. There is an action plan at the end of every single chapter. And then finally, I also host courses where we do monthly Q&As and we can talk about your specific scenarios. Anyway, thanks so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video. Cheers.